So let's go ahead and get started. But I am Becky Fry. I know I've met quite a few of you already. I am the principal planner in the Long Range Planning Division, and I'm one of the project managers for Redmond 2050. Redmond 2050 is the city's overarching project umbrella that encapsulates everything that we're doing to update the community's vision and prepare for growth for between now and 2050. And that includes comprehensive plan updates, zoning code and municipal code updates, all of our functional plan updates, like our transportation master plan, the water and sewer, wastewater, stormwater, all of those things have to all be in alignment. And so we are using Redmond 2050 for the umbrella that encapsulates all of that. I mentioned a little bit ago that we started this in 2020. We kicked it off in 2020 with a big, huge community visioning process. And so we are several years into this project and we are in the final stretch. So thank you for those of you who have been around and been chatting with me and my team for quite a while. Once we get to the discussion point, we'll have some general Q&A and then we'll break. And we'll have Marymoor related questions. I'll be over here in this corner. And then we will have Odor Cardenas and Lauren Alpert. They will be manning the mixed use conversation against the other wall. We have both of these topics tonight because the Marymoor Village Center has all of that in it. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody who was in this area had access to all of the information that's going to be impacted and the changes that are coming. And I'll go through a lot of the information in the PowerPoint, but we will open it up for a lot of conversation, and we really hope that you take the opportunity to chat with us. And I will end the presentation with an information about the timeline. So if you're interested in all of that and when it gets adopted, that'll be my last slide. Any general questions before we start here in a couple of minutes with the presentation? Okay, we'll get started in 2 minutes. If you haven't yet got food or you need seconds, feel free to help yourself. I'm gonna top up my water. Hey, Audra. There's a lobby for those online. Would you log in to the meeting and just let people in? Or if you can't, Lauren, you're the other meeting organizer. You might have to be the lobby manager. Okay, okay, great. Thanks, Josh. Okay. So everybody online can hear. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So this evening we're Feel free to get up at any point in time, grab some more food or drink, use the restroom down the hall if you need to. But we're going to go through the presentation. Like mentioned earlier, we're going to have a time for just general Q&A, and then we're going to break. Yep. Turn off your speakers. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. And then, like I said, Marymoor is going to be on this side. Mixed use is going to be on that side. We'll also have an opportunity for those who are online to put their questions in the chat. So we'll go do that. Okay. So most of you have been around for a while, but for those of you who are following online or doing the recording, just a really quick general statement. Redmond 2050, every 10 years, the community updates how it's going to grow, where it's going to grow, what it's going to look like, all of that, and how we're going to service it. How are we going to provide for equity and inclusion, sustainability, resiliency, being able to flush your toilets, all of those things has to be updated. So this is the opportunity to do this now. We're not going to do this again for 10 years. So please be participating as much as possible, because the amount of change that's happening right now is really unprecedented. And it's also unprecedented because we're going from a suburb to city, and so all of our standards are changing. So there's a number of things that are happening right now. So over the last couple of years, we've done a whole bunch of community engagement on visioning, scenario building, where do we want to growth to go. We developed what we called our preferred alternative. This is where we're going to put growth into our community for housing and jobs. It's really similar to our distribution of development today. It's not a heck of a lot of change. You'll see it's still really heavily focused in our centers. And so Marymoor Village is one of those centers. But also you'll see that Southeast Redmond has a lot over there that's not just Marymoor and not just downtown. So really quickly, we're going to start with some of the mixed use zones, but back up a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with zoning. It is the way that we actually develop a plan for where things go on the ground. Our zoning districts create development standards for what types of uses, what building form is going to be. All of that is around the zones. So when we talk about zoning and zones, it is a land use regulation tool. It's not the only tool. So we currently have 50 different zoning districts in, and that doesn't include town center, which has sub zones and a whole bunch of weird stuff that we do. We are actually going to 20. And that means basically a lot of our zoning code is being rewritten, just from the fact that we're trying to simplify things for everybody. The community has a better understanding of what it's going to look like, what's going to happen. And then staff can help review things faster because there's fewer things to keep track of and fewer differences. So we actually have a website that is on our redmond.gov. You can just type in redmond.gov/2106. It'll take you right there. You don't need the rest of it. That talks through what all of that change is. It will be changing a good percentage of the city. So the only thing that's really not changing, we're not changing our industrial business park, manufacturing, and our OBAT zoning. Everything else is going to be changing to a certain extent. So for mixed use zones, we're going to have 3 different mixed use zones. They're going to be differences in scale. So the most intense one is the urban mixed use, and then the corridor mixed use, and then neighborhood mixed use. So, but really the intention here is we have design districts, we have general commercial, we have regional retail, we have a whole lot of different zones that talk about non-commercial uses and that allow, in some cases, housing, but in other cases not, but we need housing to be there. So we've created these patterns. We've also created our neighborhood mixed use zone, which is a brand new one. And that's how we're doing our complete communities implementation, where the community has said, now we are ready to talk about where in our neighborhoods we are okay with having little things like coffee shops and ice cream stores and a little bodega. So we're trying to identify, and part of the conversation for mixed use is where and what regulations we want to apply to that, because it won't be everywhere, but it will be targeted implementation. So for the urban mixed use, it's the area in yellow, and on that poster here at the end, it's the big red block. So that's where the new urban mixed use will be. It is intended to still be the home for our big boxes. So it is not to shove big box out of the way. It will be a commercial mixed use zone. It will not look like downtown. Flip the script. It'll be mostly offices and commercial with housing integrated. Okay, so it'll look very, very different. It'll just be an urban format big box, urban format commercial. Okay. So we've got some of the standards in your packet. I'm not going to walk through here too, but the heights are going to be really similar to what you see in downtown today. Okay, so it's bigger than the Costco and the Target are right now. It will have a lot of housing integrated in there, but it will look in height similar to what you see like right out this window here too. Okay. Corridor mixed use is very similar to what we're seeing in some of our lower scale mixed use areas today. You're talking about the smaller 3, maybe 4 stories. A lot of our neighborhood mixed use zones right now look like this or are really similar to this. And so we're looking at a smaller building heights. There's definitely going to be a mixture of commercial and residential. Again, it is going where a lot of our general commercial is today. So it's still intended to be more of a commercial mixed use. So when we think about our mixed use that we have today, it's mostly housing. Right. And that is not the intention. We just want to be really, really clear. For corridor mixed use and urban mixed use, that is not the intention. It's intended to be much more commercially oriented. Your restaurants, your offices, your big grocery stores, all of those things. Okay. The neighborhood mixed uses are going to be at the scale of the current housing. So we're not going to go taller than them, but we might want if there is like a redevelopment or say a church parking lot that's not in use right now up on the corner, they want to put in a little coffee shop, right? So they might put it up on the corner, right? So it's still intended to be very small scale. It's not car oriented. It's to serve the neighborhood. So we do have a map. It's up there. It's the second poster board, but it's also online. There's a lot of information on complete communities and how we got to where we are today on our website. But we're actually soliciting input from property owners and community members on where they would like to see that go. So if you could pin a spot, mark it up on the map. If you're on the line, we actually have an online interactive map that you could pin something. So we're actually soliciting a lot of feedback. We've notified all the property owners that we've identified some preliminary potential sites, but we could have one that we adopt right away and then let the rest organically develop. We could have a handful. We just don't quite know. It's a brand new zoning district, so we got a lot of work to do over the next couple of months to try to figure out exactly how we want, where we want to implement it to kick it off. Okay. All right, so any questions on the mixed use stuff really quickly before I dive into all things Marymoor? Okay. All right, so I want to start at a really, really high level before we get down into the nitty gritty of the numbers. And I do have both, by the way. I want to start with placemaking. It's what do we want it to look like, feel like? What's the experience for this area? What's going to make it unique? And there's a lot of unique things planned for Marymoor. So the first thing we just really want to acknowledge is that how we got to this place that we are today and the goals that have been identified for Marymoor are the result of 4 years of community visioning. And so what we see today, we just want to thank the community for being such an active participant in the development of this process and the feedback that we got for it. We There's been a really strong push in our community to represent the diversity of our community in our built environment, in our forms. And so we want to use that really actively in our placemaking attempts, very specifically in certain areas, but it will be citywide. But for instance, if you're not familiar with, we're putting an intercultural district in place in Overlake. We're looking at some type of cultural district for Marymoor as well, but in a couple of unique ways. We are really looking at inclusive design for Marymoor. We want Marymoor to be a pilot neighborhood for an inclusive neighborhood. What does an inclusive neighborhood look like from a built environment perspective? And so we've got a lot of different things that we're trying to look at, all genders, ages, abilities, ranges of income and family sizes, very specifically community members with disabilities for Marymoor. That's going to be a huge push. So in Marymoor Village, we are still wanting to retain that manufacturing. That was still something that was a significant priority in the 2017 adoption of Marymoor Village. So we're keeping that in play, but we want to also continue the transition from fully manufacturing to more of a mixed use neighborhood. That will keep going. We have identified it as an inclusive neighborhood pilot project. And we're exploring the idea of a cultural and arts district for Marymoor. So this is kind of a culmination of many different thoughts and patterns as we go through conversations with property owners. Thank you for those who are here. And with our economic development folks and our economic development plan. So everybody who contributed to the economic development plan is contributing to this as well. So what that would look like, we have two pieces and parts. So one is this particular area is of extreme importance to our local tribe. Historically, on today and in the future, it will continue to be. So we would like to incorporate into the placemaking those tribal connections. And we've been talking with the tribes for the last couple of years about this. And the things that they don't want to see, the things that they do want to see, making sure that it works from that perspective. So we're talking about things like art, architectural features, signage, edible landscaping with an explanation of how the local tribes would use it. The Snoqualmie Tribal Council have asked that we incorporate in our incentive programs, tribal housing and a community space, and a couple of other things. So we're trying to incorporate the things that the tribes have as their priorities as well. And so there's a number of things that we're doing, but the goal is to have that just be a part of what is Marymoor. This area is of extreme importance to the tribes. Let's make that a visible part of our community. So the other part is an arts district. We do have some art related businesses here today. There's a significant interest in our community for having some type of arts district and spaces, especially for local artists and manufacturing. And so there could be a number of different opportunities. This will have to play out over the next several months of conversations with the community and the property owners of what that would look like and what we would do. What it could be as small as we just give birth to it and let it evolve over time. Or if there are resources in play that we could kick off and jumpstart it a little bit, we can get a little bit further. We did talk to the state and we don't qualify for a state certified yet, but that might be something that we want to at least set the framework so that if at some time in the future we do want to go for a state certified cultural district, then we don't have to change any code to do that. It would just allow it to naturally evolve into that. So those are some two things. If we did become a cultural district, it might become something that we have an art walk, events and activities. Definitely have a lot of tenants, right? So have businesses in here that are really art related, artist housing, that kind of thing. So lots of different things that we could potentially do. So here's just some examples of art that's already existed or approved for Marymoor. It's a very integrated part of this already. In 2017, there was a public art incentive for Marymoor adopted. We're going to continue that. So We'll see that fully integrated. One of the things that we are hoping to see, like in the example here on the left, they took art and integrated into the side of the building, right? So there's an integration of that. We're also looking for interactive art. And because it is an inclusive, we're looking at sensory art as well too. So things that have some type of sound interaction or something along those lines. So any type of way that we can pair both of the placemaking tools that we want, the arts and culture and the inclusive, we would like to try to pair them together. Also, we're looking for event and gathering spaces. Like I mentioned, the Snoqualmie Tribe has asked if there's a way that we can try to have some type of community space. Um, they would like it to be big enough that they could do for their ceremonies and be a sacred space, but it'd also be a shared community space and a learning and educational spot. So it would be a community event and activity space for programming too. So, right. The other thing that we're really looking at, really specifically, is universal design and just making sure that it is as accessible as possible, regardless of age or ability. There's lots of different design principles. In essence, it shouldn't be really hard to figure out how somebody with limited abilities can interact with the neighborhood or to open a door or to get into a building, right? So there's lots of things that we're trying to just figure out what are the community needs are and how we can actually integrate them into the built environment of our community. Um, so there's a lot of things that is folded into that. I've got a couple of slides here. I'm not going to go through word for word. It's in your presentation. We've had many stakeholder conversations with the community trying to identify what their biggest needs are. And so housing for community members with IDD, which is intellectual or developmental disabilities, is a significant need in our community. We need several hundred units of that. So we're going to be trying to incentivize that around our light rail stations, all of them, just because it's an easy way for them to navigate. But also making sure that our site, our blocks, our sidewalks, our lighting, all of those things are done, our entryways, all of those things. We're also looking at potentially incentivizing jobs and services for the elderly and community members with disabilities. So if you provide space for those organizations that do those services, that could be a potential incentive program. Um, Lots and lots of different reasons why designing for universal access and accessibility is important. It doesn't just help all of those who have different levels of abilities. It really has a rolling effect of all the community. Um, there's a couple of things in specific that we're trying to do from a placemaking perspective that will come through. There's a lot of code updates that will have to happen. There's a lot of work that we still have to do with the tribes. We've worked with them for a couple of years, but this summer is going to be really intensive working with them. And we do want to start the conversation about the cultural arts district as well. So that's going to be meeting with a number of arts organizations, a lot of community outreach. So that's kind of our work plan from a placemaking perspective for the next couple of months. Okay. Um, from a universal design perspective, just to keeping it in range for the ADA standards, really old minimum requirements. They really don't meet our community's needs at all. And we've heard that over and over again. The ADA was designed around a manual wheelchair. A lot of mobility devices, I use one. It is much bigger than a manual wheelchair. We have community members with electronic wheelchairs. They have a bigger footprint. Their turning radiuses are different. So if we design for ADA, we're missing the boat for a lot of our community members. For instance, one of our stakeholders is a mother of a teen who needs a reclining wheelchair, and they're a lot longer, right? So if we have our curb cuts for the sidewalks that go into the intersection because we just want one ramp and not two, well, getting that child gets them into the path of traffic and to get it. So trying to reimagine our community spaces so that it takes into consideration all of the mobility devices and all the needs of everybody in our community. And so that's why we're trying to expand it and blow it past out the minimum. Okay. Sorry, there's a little bit of a repeat there. Okay. So we're definitely looking at, I mentioned IDD housing, also just generally having more accessible housing. It doesn't necessarily have to be fully accessible housing. There's a range of scale in there. But if it's accessible ready, it makes it a lot easier a little bit later. Also a couple of other things, like if you're having if you're going to build a museum or a cultural center or something like that, which would be great and lovely, putting in an adult changing station. So if you have MS or something like that, you could go participate in those activities and centers as well. One of my big pet peeves is if I'm out with my mobility device and I go to a store and they have a really heavy door with a door handle, I have to knock on the window to get them to come open the door for me. I do not want to see that type of thing in Marymoor. I want us to be able to be fully navigable independently without having to like stop, get help. I can't even get into your store places. So trying to figure out how we can make those types of things. The other thing, an example here too, our community members have asked for a way that we can integrate charging stations. If we have a cafe, can they think about a charging station? So I use a mobility device, it's a scooter, but if you have electric wheelchair and you want to be out and about for the day, you might need to stop for coffee and plug in while you're at your coffee shop too. So trying to just try to figure out how people can be as independent as possible and how does that interface with how we build our community. Because a lot of the things that we do in our community are unknowingly excluding people just because we made a choice that to continue a pattern that was built around somebody who was a 6 foot tall mobile person. And if you happen to not be 6 foot tall and not mobile or have some sort of limitation in movement or visibility, then that choice doesn't make any sense. Okay. So that may also include things like incorporating wayfinding features in the building design. So having it so that the building makes it obvious where the entrance is. The entrance isn't like hidden. I don't know. There's a a lot of architecture where you're like, I have no idea where the door is, right? And so using architectural features, material change, color change, either in the pattern of the surface that you're walking on or the building or a combination of both, just to make it so that people can independently navigate, both if they have challenges navigating from a visual standpoint, a mental standpoint, or they just are language, they don't know how to ask, they don't speak English very well. It's just trying to get help navigating with their loss is difficult, right? So if the built environment is intuitive, then it's trying to increase the independence. So again, just some more community goals. There's an example of, some of the sidewalks and whatnot. Um, so from a placemaking perspective, the intent really is to try to make it as open, inclusive, welcoming as it can be. And that's really going to be the primary focus from a placemaking perspective. Now we get into the development standards, the nitty gritty pieces and parts. So currently there's a lot of different zones in Marymoor itself. On the inside where we are today, there's 5 zones. There's actually several more outside. We have general commercial, manufacturing, multifamily, all in the strip and on the southern side. But on the inside, we're taking these 5 zones and consolidating them into 3 just to simplify it a little bit. It's a relatively small area. We didn't necessarily feel that we needed to keep that 5 distinct zones. And so what that means is there's going to be some variation on that. But as you can also see, some of the shapes are changing a little bit. So right now, the most intense district is MDD1, and that's becoming MDD core, and with MDD1 and MDD2, some of the MDD2 is going into edge. But you can see that the more intensive area in the blue is growing. And so that's just to allow a little bit of change to acknowledge the fact that right across from the light rail station is right across from the light rail station. And so it's just as appropriate to have the more intense development. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to acknowledge here, this really is something that had a lot of community input. We were here in April of last year asking, do we want to go to 3? Do we want to go to 2? How many zones do we want to come down from? And so all of this really has been an extensive community engagement process. So where we ended up with is these three. So Marymoor Core, which is the closest to the light rail station, Marymoor Manufacturing, which is the MDD for today. We're just relabeling it to manufacturing, and there's some slight changes in there, but mostly that's not going to change. And then everything on the southern piece of that, so it parts of 1, 2, 3, 5 are all going to Marymoor Edge. So one of the things that we're doing here, though, is changing the heights and the potential. So what we're doing around each of the light rail stations is implementing TOD, transit-oriented development focus areas. And with the incentive package, you can do up to 12 stories. There is a lot of caveats on that, and there's a lot of tricky things in Marymoor that need to get worked out. And there's some individual environmental work that would need to be done. We've been talking with a number of the property owners about all of those pieces and parts. But we're going from today a maximum of 4, 5, and 6 to 12 with the incentives. Keeping in mind that the incentives I'll talk a little bit more about later, but they are community driven, and they're talking about trying to implement the goals of the community. But it's also a balancing act too. So, but the core is intended to be much more mixed. Are a lot of the services, the offices, housing, definitely for sure in there. But it's a more of a mixture, and then it's definitely more of residential with definitely some services, restaurants, and whatnot. So there's a lot of other things mixed in on the edge, but it's not necessarily as intense. Now, on the ground, everybody walking through, they may not experience that any differently, right? Because on the ground, as you're walking through, it'll all still look like, oh, there's a restaurant, there's an art studio, so they're going to be more focused on just their sidewalk experience. But in the manufacturing, the uses are going to be pretty much the same, although we might make some slight changes to really emphasize the art related uses. And so that TOD focus area is the crosshatch area here. It excludes the manufacturing area because a part of the community commitment that was made in 2017 and recommitted after community conversations here was to make sure that the manufacturing in that area can stay and to not put a lot of pressure on that area to redevelop. And so that we were not putting the TOD focused in there, so that would not go up to 12 stories. Okay. So it does pop out on between the trail and Redmond Way. That is where the hotel and the family pancake house are. So that is included in the TOD focus area. So again, the TOD focus area boundaries were developed and modified over time through community engagement, property owner conversations. So, okay. This is the draft of the development standards. In the 11 by 17 handout, I put the old and the new side by side. So you can see in some cases there's no change. In some cases there is a big change. And so I'm not going to go through the numbers today, but just again, we're going from a max potential of, the 3 to 6 range to a maximum potential of 12 in most of this. We're also talking about some step back revisions. So after a certain number of stories, the building steps back from the front. We're looking at potentially changes to both just the general step back alignment and also the height step back from the park. So right now in the map where you see the shaded area in the map on the right, it has 100-foot step back. So after a certain number of stories, you have to pull the building back 100 feet. We're proposing putting that to 40 feet. So it's a much less step back. So there's a couple of things we're doing from step backs. A couple of the property owners have asked us to do some roadway realignment and roadway type changes. All of those are in the works of conversations. They have allowed me to share this in a really general form, but there's nothing decided at this point. But just to let you know. So for those of us who are trying to figure out where we are, the Marymoor Community Center is on this corner right here. Okay. So So, but the requests are generally to be more pedestrian oriented street types. And so the city had a lot of conversations about the proposals and are generally supportive with some things to be worked out. Um, Also, when the Marymoor Village was adopted in 2017, it created a very unique set of code for the streets. Street patterns and typology names were very just unique to Marymoor. We're trying to get away from having completely different codes in every single section of the city. And so what downtown and Marymoor are going to be doing is looking to what we've drafted for Overlake as our standard for that. And so we're going to be looking at um, the same type of patterning for that. What that means is your setbacks and your build to lines and your pedestrian, your public realm standards. Public realm is back of the curb to the front of the building. Okay. So all of those will be based on what type of uh, pedestrian activity we want on that street and that block frontage. And so it'll be done, we'll have a map and we'll have a table and it'll simplify it that way. Okay. And the incentive program, it's going to be very similar. We're striking all the incentive programs citywide. They're all going to be brand new. We're going to be using the structure of the Overlake incentives and creating a new incentive chapter in code. And we'll just have columns for different areas, and some things will be blacked out as not accessible in that area. And then you'll have different points, obviously. In Overlake, we're going up to 30 stories. In Marymoor downtown, only 20. So the points you're going to earn are going to be a little bit different. The scale is going to be a little bit different too, because the city priorities are different. So the points you're going to get are the weighting are going to be a little bit different in each area. So Marymoor does not need a sports court because we've got Marymoor Park right behind us, right? But so there's a lot of just things that are going to be a little bit different in different areas. But we're definitely going to have a lot of the same category and the same structure. So if you looked at the overlay calculator and you looked, it'll work the exact same way. But Marymoor will have a really heavy focus on the placemaking pieces, the inclusive neighborhood, the tribal integration, inclusive housing, all of those pieces are going to be really heavily weighted for Marymoor. And it will also include the standard affordable housing, green building, relocation of existing businesses. The anti-displacement measures are going to be really important for Marymoor. We want to try to rehouse as many of the businesses that we can. In Marymoor would be great if we can phase it that way. But in Redmond, in general, we have a lot of businesses that are going to have to move as areas get redeveloped. So we're trying to do some business relocation packages and be supportive of that from an incentive package performance. And then obviously there's a number of different community priorities. So if you're partnering with an educational organization or one of the nonprofits that does the services that we really need in Marymoor, then that would earn an incentive as well. So um, that is currently with our consultant with cost estimating. We hope to get that back and we'll have a draft incentive package by the end of August. So, but I'll have a preliminary look that I can share with folks at the end of July, hopefully. We are doing design standard updates citywide. We're starting with the downtown package. So for those of you who were at our downtown meeting on Tuesday, that will give you a really good starting point for how things are changing. What we are going to be doing is making some changes to make sure that the design standards accomplish what we need to accomplish in Marymoor. But what it will be is here's the design standard, and then here's the slight variation for Marymoor. Here's the slight variation for Overlake. Here's, so we're going to have a basic standard and we'll do just some minimum modifications if we can. One of the things that is going to be unique for Marymoor is the direction from the community and council was Marymoor should be very eclectic. It should be very unique. The buildings should be different from each other. There should be a vibrancy and a lack of monotony that we get complaints about in downtown all the time. And so we're going to be putting that in as well. So what we're hoping to do is to really pinpoint the goals and then be very flexible with the designers on how to achieve them and really encourage being creative. But you're not going to be able to do the exact same thing as the next building over. And you're going to have some building modulation. You can't just do one huge big box on your entire lot. You're going to have to do some variation on that. So, but the goal is to allow flexibility to encourage creativity in those spaces. And we're going to have a really, really intense focus on inclusion and accessibility. So that universal design piece. Um, so, so nearing the end, review and adoption schedule. So we are going to have a lot of this preliminary drafted by the end of July. There's some pieces that will take through August to finish up. The incentive program is one of those. Over the course of the summer, we're going to have a lot of community engagement, stakeholder opportunities. Please review the drafts and give me your feedback. Because what we're going to do is at the fall, we're going to start the Planning Commission review. And we're going to have a Planning Commission public hearing by the end of the year so that we can turn it over to council for their review and adoption. And we're aiming for March. Now, that'll all depend on the council schedules, and can we get on the right council meetings, or how many study sessions the Planning Commission needs to review everything. But we're aiming for March, but we're looking for spring of 2025, no matter what. Okay. So that is the end of the presentation. Are there any general questions before we break and allow you to go talk in small groups?
You elaborate on that last slide just a little bit.
So yeah, so right now the section of code that has the Marymoor development standards, I'm about halfway through. The end pieces are the street realignment pieces, because that's going to take a little bit more work to work through. What I will do is I'll share the current draft, and we'll get all of that posted with the materials from this meeting. I got final review of that initial piece from everybody just yesterday. So I can go ahead and release that draft, but a lot of the data is what you'll see in here. Just know that if it has anything to do with street alignments, it's not done yet. That's something we'll just need to work out. Our goal is to try to get a preliminary, at very least, a preliminary outline by the end of July. But with all of the holiday and vacation schedules.
But you wouldn't expect that to have the incentive.
No, the consultant work from the incentive will not be back to me until the end of July. However, I am going to be doing a focus group with you and a few others on the mass timber model. And so actually, they haven't given me a final confirmation yet, but the date that we're going to aim for that, we were looking at July 12th, Lauren, or somewhere around the 12th. Mass timber. Or was it the 19th? It may have been the 19th. Okay, but we'll confirm that really soon. But we wanted to make sure, Sean, you and all of our mass timber folks have been helping work through that. We want to have that be put into it before they finalize all of their actual numbers. And so when we talked, Tuesday with them, the team, we decided that we're just gonna have a focus group. We're just gonna do it that way. So if anybody else is interested in that mass timber aspect of it, please let me know. But I'm just gonna go back to my mass timber folks that I've been talking with for the last couple of years as the main folks for that. But yeah, and then when I get that back from them, it'll just be the costing piece, and then I'll have to have the city priority piece to put that. So that'll take a couple of weeks before we actually have, like, here's the proposal. But as soon as I have the information from them, we'll go out to the community and we'll say, hey, does this match your expectations? Do their assumptions match what you're seeing? And we'll get all of that and we'll be able to provide feedback to them, with that, so. But the goal is to have that in August. Here's the proposed incentive program for downtown and Marymoor, both. Okay, so the week of July 15th for a mass timber stakeholder meeting. So if you want to shoot me your availability, Sean, I'll do that. Okay. Does that help?
Thank you.
Anything else from a timeline or anything else? Yeah, cool.
So once the rezoning is complete, you guys ever have like a look back period where you evaluate if after a year, 2 years, 5 years, this is accomplishing what you wanted to?
Yeah, we do. And we actually have a formalized 5-year plan that we have to submit a report. How are we doing? Are the expectations and things that we did to meet our growth management requirements paying out? Are the buildings that we thought were going to be developed being developed? Are we on track? So we're going to be doing that in 5 years, but we also have an annual code update process. So if we see something that is just not working in our annual code updates, we can change that. So we have so much changing right now. We are almost guaranteed that there's something that's not going to work right at the very get-go. We're doing the absolute best we can, but the whole entire code is being rewritten. There's probably going to be something that pops up as, oh, okay, maybe we should tweak that a little bit. And so if that does come up, we will make those changes. And that is a part of our built-in cycle of review. Way?
Yeah. There's a two, in distance or different interpretation on the building height. One, you using a number of stories. Sometimes you're using the,
Yeah. So the
what is
current code uses stories, but stories varies by building. And so our planning director has determined that we're not going to use stories anymore. The new code will have feet. And that's it, so that everybody understands what you can put in there, how tall it's gonna be. Because if you have 3 stories where all 3 stories are 20 stories, it's a very, very different building height than a 3-story house, right? And so current code lists stories, and on that 11 by 17 handout, I put it like what would this translate to in feet-ish approximately, knowing that the stories really varies.
but that looks like, that sounds like a victory to what we're trying to do for Marymoor, because Marymoor want a diversity of heights.
Mm-hmm.
And also art and different functions you want to accommodate, which need a higher ceiling, a floor to ceiling heights.
Yeah,
So having that number of story limitation, I think is the better for Marymoor, just for Marymoor.
Everything will be 45 feet.
Otherwise you'll be.
yeah, no, the design standards require modulation.
Yeah.
So everything's not gonna be flat at a particular height. There's building step backs too, there's all sorts of things that you can do to add variation, and we want variation. But the direction was set from the planning director, we're gonna use feet, and I don't see that changing. Because the entire code has been switched from stories to feet. We're trying to be consistent and not have one area be different than everybody else.
Understand to simplify everything for the Redmond different areas, but
Yeah.
Marymoor you're talking about lots of different things. For example, art gallery, the working lots, artist lots, and all these kind of things have a different floor to floor height.
Yeah.
And
So one of the things that we did in Overlake that we can consider doing in Marymoor as well is that we need some first floor spaces at a 24 clear height. Because 12 doesn't work, 16 doesn't work. For instance, the brewery right across the way, their equipment's going to be taller potentially. For bakery, might need a taller stove, right? So some spaces need that taller first floor clearance. So what we did in Overlake was we said the standard will be 16, but if you go up to 20, we can transfer that and you can add that extra 4 feet, or if you go up to 18, add an extra 2 feet to the top. For the areas where you go taller on the first floor, you'll get that allowance. You can just kind of bump up the building a little bit. So that allows for a little bit of flexibility on the first floor. So that is one of the ways that we've allowed for some variation. And we could do that same allowance in Marymoor as well. If you like, the standard will be 16, but if you do go up to 20, you can increase the building height by 4 feet in those areas, so you don't lose a story. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
How's the business support for existing businesses or forced to relocate?
Yeah, so that is really, really important to us. And so the city hired an economic development team about a year and a half ago, recognizing that there was going to be a lot of businesses needing help moving around as things get redeveloped. We're developing incentives to support business relocation. Also, we're working with One Redmond to help provide services to identify potential partnerships that you can make with a developer early in their design process so that they can identify you're going to need to be moving at this point in time, and I'm going to be built about that same time. So let me think up the timing and have you move into my building. Let's talk through that. So there's a number of different things our economic development folks are trying to work through to help navigate that process and assist the businesses that are there. Our community economic development manager is Philly Marsh. Once we're done here, I can put her contact information up on the board, so you can reach out directly to her and connect with her.
Because it's totally unclear when we have to.
I'm sorry.
It's totally unclear when the businesses have to move.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
businesses are starting to move because things have planned and there's an incentive support there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are hoping to do is by having some really clear conversations with property owners that are intending to redevelop, making sure that the communication loop with the tenants is there as well. So that, I know that this area is going to be redeveloped, but I don't know if it's going to be redeveloped in 6 months or 2 years. You know, how is that going to impact everything? So if we can work really closely on a really good communication loop, then we can make sure that the businesses know what the impacts and when it's going to hit, so that we can start helping figure out that marriage of partnerships, right?
Not happening at this point.
We've been hearing that, but we're trying to see if there's a better system that we can put in place to help with that. Anything else from a general question standpoint? Okay, I am going to open it up to general questions for the community members who are online. Any questions from online? Okay, we'll let you type in chat if you would like. We'll monitor the chat. But we'll go ahead and turn the lights on right now and we will break into their smaller groups.